Hello everyone and welcome back to episode 3 of AAPI History. My name is Shreya Joshi and in today's episode we'll be talking about the role of Asian Americans in agriculture, the influx in AAPI immigration, and the court cases that defined what it meant to be an Asian American. In the early 20th century, i.e. the Gilded Age, the United States was just that, gilded. On the surface, you see mass economic and technological improvement, but if you go deeper, you find poor working conditions, xenophobia, and often cyclical poverty. It's like the idea of advisory. On the surface, it seems like a really good idea, but if you actually examine what's going on, you'll find that the time could be better spent. Similarly, the mass industrialization on the surface often hid the poor working conditions of those working underneath it. As working conditions grew worse, the response to them grew too. We've all heard about the Homestead strike in the steel industry, but strikes were happening all across the board. In fact, the largest strike during this era was actually initiated by Asian Americans. On June 25th, 1867, thousands of Chinese railroad workers went on strike for better working conditions, equal pay, and shorter hours while working on the Transcontinental Railroad. Instead of working, they went back to camp, thousands strong. This level of mass labor organization had never been seen before, especially from a group of people considered docile. Striking cut into profits, so the Union Pacific directors cut off all food to the camps, and due to starvation, the strike ceased, without any increase in pay. And while this strike was unsuccessful, it demonstrates that in history, people never just accept oppressive conditions. They often attempt to resist. The theme of the oppressed worker would continue in Hawaii, of all places. After the annexation of Hawaii, which we could go into, hint, check out an actual Crash Course video, cultivation of land began to take place. After all, in American history, the idea that you should respect the land, not try to make money off of it, especially when it's not yours, was definitely not a common occurrence. So, land needs to be farmed, money needs to be made. Who you gonna call? Cheap labor who usually happen to be immigrants. A combination of laws were passed that pulled Japanese immigrants to Hawaii to work on sugar plantations. By 1894, over a third of Hawaii's population demographic was Japanese. On the sugar plantation, workdays were long, labor exhausting, and conditions brutal. If you were found talking, smoking, or even taking a break, you were beaten or whipped. In addition, non-white laborers were often paid at different rates than white laborers, sometimes as little as $4 a month. Pay raises were difficult, as plantation owners often pitted races against one another to prevent them from unionizing. Nevertheless, they still did. The Manongs were Filipino farm workers that played a significant role in building the farm workers' movement, organizing and striking alongside Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. Despite being one of the largest labor forces in the West, Filipinos had to adhere to strict laws that prevented intermarriage, owning land, etc. And these laws that stripped them of human dignity would only embolden society to do the same. On January 19, 1930, 500 men dragged dozens of Filipino men from their homes and beat and lynched them in Wattsville, California. They rampaged through the small community for 5 days straight, laying waste to it and attacking any Filipinos found. Despite the damage done and the lives taken, not one out of the 500 men involved were charged with murder. Yet to the immigrant, hard working conditions, cold receptions, and brutality have never been a deterrent. And as the influx of AAPI immigrants increased, so did questions about their position in society. 2 landmark court cases would happen. First, the United States versus Wong Kim Arc. This case revolved around the question of who exactly was entitled to birthright citizenship. Wong was born to Chinese immigrant parents who had lived in the US for 20 plus years but then went back. So then at the age of 21, Wong went to China to visit his parents. Upon arriving back at the United States, Wong was denied entry because he was not an American citizen, despite being born here. The case went up to the Supreme Court, and the court came to the conclusion that the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment did consider Wong to be an American citizen. As a result, the court established the parameters of jus soli, or citizenship as a birthright, a concept that is contested even today. But without that clause, I can guarantee you almost every youth intern making and producing these videos wouldn't be one. Thankfully, though, birthright citizenship was established, although the naturalization process wasn't. Which leads us to our second court case, the United States versus Bhagat Singh Tind. Bhagat Singh Tind was an Indian-American writer, lecturer of spirituality, and a World War I veteran. As an Indian-American, in 1923, he filed to become a citizen of the United States under the Naturalization Act of 1906. He was represented by an Indian-American lawyer in the Supreme Court who argued that the term Aryan encompasses the entire Indian subcontinent, so Indian Americans should be eligible for citizenship. The court unanimously rejected Tind's argument, adding that Tind did not meet a common-sense definition of white, i.e. he was too brown to be an Aryan, which is a misunderstanding of the Aryan people. Regardless, as a result, no person of Indian origin could become a naturalized American citizen, which caused many Indians to lose their previously held citizenship. But as India's own independence came closer to reality, Indians argued for an end to legislative discrimination. Bhagat Singh Tind was eventually granted citizenship by the state of New York in 1936. Bhagat Singh Tind went on to author many books, and one of my favorite quotes from him is, "You must never be limited by an external authority. Whether it be vested in a church, man, or book, it is your right to question, challenge, and investigate." History is an investigative process, and if we're limited by an external authority, there would be so much that we would never uncover and remember. Even today, we investigate and question and challenge just so we can remember. The Tulsa race riots, for example, weren't investigated until nearly 70 years after the fact. They can be taught about today because a group of people cared enough to investigate and remember. The targeted killing of Filipinos by over 500 people that I talked about earlier doesn't even have a name. Despite the atrocity being nameless, I can tell you about it today because somebody cared enough to investigate and remember. But these are just the instances in history we know about because somebody cared enough to question them. So, my question for you, our lovely audience, is how many more questions can we ask? Thanks for watching and see you next time!